I'd like to welcome everyone out this evening. It's good to see all of you and all the visitors we've got with us tonight. And, yesterday I came back and it was like coming back home and seeing a lot of faces that I hadn't seen in quite some time. And now, tonight, I'm also seeing faces that I haven't seen in a really long time. And now I'm just starting to realize that now I just feel really old. When I look at these young kids that I went to church with and I saw and they were playing and running around, now I'm chasing my own kids around, and the kids that used to be running around are all looking me right in the eye. Conversation with Cole last night, we were talking about, I guess you would say, the most significant sermon I've probably ever preached here. We'll just call it that. He said, "What were you talking about?" And I was like, "Man, Cole wasn't even born when that happened." And here he is talking to me, looking me eye to eye. And I thought, I actually made a deal with him last night. I said, because I've heard he preached up here. I don't know with him. I wanted to come out, and I wanted to be in the pew, and I wanted to see him up here one of these days. And then I asked him tonight if he wanted to do it tonight. And he went, "Yeah, sure. Good deal." And you can ask Roger, who's here tonight, whenever they asked me to be the preacher at Pleasant Valley, I looked at him and I said, "I've never done that on a full-time day." So you got an eager young man. That's good to see. Tonight what we're going to be talking about is the declaration of a sacrifice. And it's like, what does making a sacrifice actually mean? It's something that we have I don't want to say we have it, because you all are probably smarter than I am. This is something that I have to figure out, right? We have it, because you all are probably smarter than I am. This is something that I have to figure out, right? It's something that you understand, or I understand, as something that's a little bit abstract to me. It's like, I understand what a sacrifice is, but why do you make a sacrifice? So, if I asked you what the first sacrifice, what would be your answer? I see wheels turning. If you go all the way back to Genesis chapter 4, verses 1 through 5, you read about the first sacrifices ever made to God. It says there, now Adam knew Eve to God. It says there, now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, "I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord." And again she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. So there's something interesting, some interesting things in these verses. First, Cain and Abel are sacrificing to God before there was a commandment from God to sacrifice to Him. So that's something that's interesting. It's right off the bat for me, because it's like, okay, why did the Israelites sacrifice to God? Well, you could use the easy answer. It's because that was commanded in God's law. But guess who predates God's law here? Cain and Abel do. The law of the Israelites hasn't been written down yet. So that begs the question, at least in my mind, why did Cain and Abel? What was going through their minds? Why were they doing this? Second, when we read through this, and we see these men making these offerings to God, not all sacrifices, or the performance of the sacrifices, are equal, are they? Because Cain offers his sacrifice, and it did not please God. So obviously, there's a measurement. There's a description here. There's something going on that makes Cain's offering, or the way that he offers, less pleasing to God than the way that Abel is making the offering. So what exactly, when we look at this, we'll break this down. What exactly is a sacrifice then? The easiest way for me to frame it is through the three components of the sacrifice. One, the person making the sacrifice. So in these scriptures, the person making the sacrifice is Cain and Abel, right? Two, the object being sacrificed. Cain offered the fruits of the ground. Abel offered from the firstborn of his flock. So they're making offerings. That's the object it's offering. And three, that which is being sacrificed to. Okay. Tony mentioned in his prayer when he's praying, one of the things that he said was, and this is, hopefully I can convey this throughout the sermon, right? But one of the things that he said was he prayed to God and he said, we know we're getting further away from you. And really what that means is, and not us in particular, but the world as a whole, what that means is, and not us in particular, but the world as a whole, what that means is we're not sacrificing as much to you now as we are sacrificing to other things. Okay? So with this in mind, we can understand that a sacrifice, and hopefully this makes sense, right? Hopefully, with this in mind, we can understand that a sacrifice is an action in which the person making the sacrifice, number one, offers something of importance, number two, in order to demonstrate the importance of that which is being sacrificed to, number three, to the offerer. Okay? So what we're saying here is, if Tony's important to me, his ratio of importance to me depends upon the most important object that I will sacrifice to him. Right? So if I'm not willing, so think about it in New Testament terms. When Christ says, he talks about if someone asks for your coat or asks for your shirt, he said, take it off your back and give it to him. Asks you to go 1 mile with you, go 2 miles with them, right? So it's like going above and beyond what you're willing. He says, Michael, will you walk 1 mile with me? And I say, no. Then I'm not willing to sacrifice that much for Tony. And that means the ratio of how important he is to me is somewhere below the threshold of walking 1 mile. Okay? So hopefully we got all that pulled together there. Signifying to God that God is more important than the most important physical possession that a shepherd could own. Okay, so if you think about what he's doing here, and there's two ways, and I'm not really sure how you do it, but either way it still makes the same point. Firstborn of the flock. Okay, farmers in the audience, when you have firstborn of the flock, okay, farmers in the audience, when you have a firstborn of the flock, whether it be the actual first animal you receive in the spring, okay, are you guaranteed anything after that? No. Okay, now here's the other instance of it. If you look at it like the one in the flock, okay, farmers, which one do you really want to take care of because that's your livelihood? The firstborn and highest quality of the flock. So what Abel is given to God, signifying, is that the most important possession that he could have regarding to his livelihood, his physical life on earth, because you got to remember, at the time that Abel's living, he's a shepherd, right? These sheep are literally life and death to him. The most important physical possession that he could possibly possess is not as important to him as who? God. Because he, as who? God. Because he gives it over as a sacrifice. And now every one of us, when we look at the way that Abel is sacrificed to God, can understand that first righteous man, Abel, we can understand the importance of God to him. Okay? It is of God to him. Okay? And then we'll stop for just a second. Cain's sacrifice did not please God. Okay? Bad thing is I can't remember how far I get into this, but you guys know how that goes. Yeah, the PowerPoints are to keep me on track, right? So I may wind up reading through something that I say right. Cain's sacrifice fell flat, fell short. Okay? So what does that mean? That means that either there was a problem, because, okay, here's the question. Is there ever a problem with God? No. That means there's either a problem with the sacrifice, meaning that wasn't the most important thing to Cain. You know, you think about the Pharisees in the New Testament. They said, what was the value of the sacrifice in the New Testament? Was it because it was offered to God? It was valuable because of the gold or what it was worth to them. The importance of the sacrifice was the value for them. They lost their bearings on what they came and they devoted themselves. Okay, why do you devote yourselves to the Scriptures? So that we might have a good working relationship with God. That's the reason. That's why we sacrifice our time to it. Now, on the other side of that, why were the Pharisees sacrificing their time? So they could have the broad phylacteries. so they could have. You see, what they were sacrificing was not to God. It was with the status that came with looking like a righteous person. So it is in the sacrifice structure that we can understand then why Abraham was singled out by God to make a covenant with. Because when you think about this, of all the people that existed on the make a covenant with. Because when you think about this, of all the people that existed on the face of the earth up until Abraham's time, there was only one that God says, I will make a covenant with you, and I will make, your children as numerous as the stars. And through your seed shall the nations be blessed. It was Abraham, the stars. And through your seed shall the nations be blessed. It was Abraham, right? Genesis chapter 22, verses 1 through 12. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham, you think about it. If you were asked this, it's like Tony. The voice, wherever this voice comes from, right? The voice of God comes to you and says, sacrifice Brady on an altar to me. Okay, so that's the setup. That's the anybody that has a child, anybody that's expecting a child, they understand, when we'll get to this to say, I don't want to go too far ahead of myself. Anybody that's expecting or has a child or know what it is to feel a father's love understands what it is God is asking of Abraham here. Abraham, he said, Here I am. He said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham didn't deny God, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. And then Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey, and come again to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, and he laid it on Isaac his son, and he took in his hand the fire and the knife, and they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father, Abraham, my father, and he said, Here I am, my son. And you think about how this process is working out, too, as we go through this. Sacrifice your only son. Your beloved son, the son of promise, the one that you said that I couldn't deliver to, or that Sarah said I couldn't deliver to you. Take that son now and give him up. Right? And any parent in this audience can think about their son or their daughter, whichever it is. That's the calling. Hey, sacrifice that son, that daughter, that child. Right? Okay, which one of you and am I going to do as Abraham did and raise up early in the morning and say, let's do this? And not only that, it takes dedication. We talk about and not only that, it takes dedication. We talk about the difference between discipline and motivation, right? If you have motivation, you'll get something started, but if you have discipline, you'll keep going. For 3 days, Abraham's journeying. As hour by hour, Abraham's journeying. As hour by hour ticks by, as minute by minute ticks by, Abraham's probably thinking, one, maybe he's thinking what actually happens. Maybe he's like, where's the deliverance? Where is this? But this is going on for 3 days, knowing exactly it's a moment of dread that's set before him. Looks you in the eye, or your child looks you in the eye and says, where's the offering? He said, Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb? For a burnt offering, and Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. That's one of those things. I often try to put myself in the shoes of the people that we read about, because I like, they're men and women just like we are men and women. It's like if that's the answer, it's kind of like Abraham said, he says, where's the burnt offering? And Abraham said, God will provide. Now, what's he not doing? He's not looking at his son and saying, this is what the commandment is. You ever give your kid one of the protection answers? Right? It's similar to what we talked about yesterday whenever Aaron pulls the calves out of the flame, right? It says in the scripture he carved them and he molded them and he made them. But if you think about the very human side of his nature, when Moses comes down and says, "What have you done?" He's like, "I didn't have nothing to do with it," right? You see this human side, this very human answer that's like, God will provide. Don't worry about it. It's like, we don't want to talk about that right now. Maybe Abraham saying, I don't want to talk about this right now. So they went both of them together. When they came to the place of which God had told them. Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. It's like step by step this progression. It's like, hey, it's getting late in the hour here, Lord. And Abraham reached out his hand and he took the knife to slaughter his son. All the way to that point. What do you think Abraham was going to do? Do you think he wasn't going to slaughter Isaac? Absolutely not. That's kind of the establishment there when Isaac asks Abraham, like, "Where's the lamb?" And Abraham looks at it and says, "God will provide." It's not a comfortable situation here. But do you think Abraham is stopping? Because Abraham works in the Bible, when you go through and you read these people, and one of the things that it says, this is what it says in the Bible for, like, when Jeroboam decided to make the calves, right? It's like, he reasoned in his heart that the people would go back to David if they continue to serve the God of David. And there's always this reasoning in the heart that you continue to serve the God of David. And there's always this reasoning in the heart that you see. That's kind of what you're seeing here. He picks up the knife, and at the last moment, the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am." He said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to..." And he said, "Here I am." He said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to harm him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Now, do you think about this for a second? Just 1 second. Do you think, and this was a question offered me, this topic, this was a question offered me, do you think that God did not know Abraham would do that for him? Yes, he knew Abraham would do that for him. So why is this in the scriptures? So that you and I know. And then the whole reasoning is brought down here, and it's all shown. It says, now, not only do I know, but now Tony knows, now Jay knows, now Adam knows, now Doug knows, we all know what kind of man Abraham was, especially regarding to the sacrifice structure that we just laid out. Right? Abraham's the type of man that it's like, forget your livelihood. What's one of the things we say whenever things go bad? It's like, oh man, I lost my job, but at least I have my family. That's another call back to Job there. It's like everything gets touched on Job. First his property, then his family. On Job, first his property, then his family, and then him himself. But here's the other argument, and I would pose this question to any father or mother here in the audience. It's like, would you take disease so that you knew that your children would be healthy? Absolutely you would. So it even goes even higher than that. It's like, this is to withhold his only son if I asked him to sacrifice him to me. God goes on to make his covenant with Abraham, and in the later verses, but he states that Abraham was a man with such reverence for God that he would not withhold anything from God. And it may not seem like we perform sacrifices today, but the fact is that every single thing that we do is a sacrifice. We look at this and we look back on the old law, and it's like, yes, the old law was a very outward type of law. Believe it or not, the man that kind of showed this to me is in the audience right now. It was Tony. He talks about how you talked about, and I don't even know if you remember talking about it, but he talks about how in the old law, thou shalt not kill, right? And that's an outward condition. Murder is an outward condition. But in the new law, how's it go? You shall not even hate your brother. So what's the new law starting to work on? Starting to work on the inward condition. So here's the question. We don't make the outward sacrifice anymore, but by showing you the structure of the sacrifice, you can see the inward conditioning going on inside of a man or inside of a woman. So now here's the question. I guess this would be more. Second, that you are conscious, you are making a sacrifice. Tell me, because you are here tonight listening to me, you can do nothing else with the time that you spend doing it. Things of value. Here's the question. Who here knows that their time here is limited? Okay, when did it start getting limited? Was it limited, once I hit the age of 30? Will it be limited when I hit 40? Will it be limited when I hit 50? Or was it limited at the very second of my birth? That's when it was limited. I always thought about this, and maybe it's just because I was a weird kid, right? But I always thought about this. It's like, okay, I don't even know today's date. Well, yes, I do know today's date because it's Avery's birthday. I better know today's date, right? It's March 28th, right? March 28th, 2022. In your lifetime, no matter if you live March 28th, 2022. In your lifetime, no matter if you live to be 150 years old, you will never again live through March 28th, 2022. That day is over. And whatever the choices you made during that day is what you sacrifice that day to. What you sacrifice that day to. When Tony talks about this, whenever he said in his prayer, as we move away from God, that we're moving, it's because people are spending less time sacrificing things to God. And if you think about what the call to the New Testament is, what's the sacrifice you're required to make? Everything that I am. Every fiber of my being belongs to you, Lord. It's not me doing Michael Cochran's will anymore. When you're baptized, you proclaim your faith in Jesus Christ, you proclaim that you want to be a Christian. What you're saying is, I will not live my whole existence, my whole freedom, to say I want to walk in the footsteps of Christ. Why? Because of what we talked about a little bit last night. Because He is the highest image that man has ever seen. He's the highest good that anything has ever been attained on this earth. There was nothing before Him, and there's been nothing after Him that's been as good as Him. You talk about this like, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here. By doing one thing, with the time it takes to do that one thing, you sacrifice every other thing you could be doing. And you can also, and this is kind of interesting to me, we live in a time, and I think it's evident in the way that things are going, that people don't really have a whole lot of value. They don't place a lot of value on things, and they don't have a moral structure. Asking these questions, it's like, Jay, whoever, it's like, what's the most important thing to you? And you might say, let's just leave the realm of the spiritual out of it for a minute, just to make it easier. Because this is the tougher part, right? To be like Abraham. But if you just go with your physical possessions, you realize you can go through every single one of your physical possessions and you can structure them out on how valuable they are to you by saying, I would sacrifice this to that. So it's like this, okay? What's the thing else? Well, if you ask me, I'm not going to sacrifice my family. What, would you sacrifice your home to save your family? 100%. Not even a thought in my head. We're sacrificing my home to save my family. Okay, let's break that down. Would you sacrifice your home to save your car? No, I wouldn't do that. No, I wouldn't do that. So now, look, you're starting to see the structures come out. We do this with anything. It's like, you look at the books, or any kind of books. It's like, would you sacrifice your copy of, Old Yeller for whatever reason. That's the name that came to my mind. Would you sacrifice your copy of Old Yeller there, right? So that you could read the Bible. And then you can take that. It's like, how many books have you read? And it's the question we asked last night. Well, we've read books, but do we read the Bible? And then when we say that we read the highest man, which one is the highest book? And I'll make this point again just because we have new faces here. Whenever you think about it, this is just factually historical. This doesn't require any faith on anybody's part whatsoever. The first book ever mass-produced was what? The Holy Bible. The number one selling book, the Holy Bible. It's been shut for 2,000 years, and we've come up with nothing better. That would be a book worth reading, I would think. And that's what I told you last night. It took me 20 years to read through the whole thing. What was I sacrificing my time to? Through the whole thing. What was I sacrificing my time to? With Abraham's willingness to withhold nothing from God, and Cain seemingly sacrificing something of lesser value to God, we begin to understand that God has to be that which we would withhold nothing from. Consequently, the thing which we would sacrifice everything to. And that includes what? As hard as it is, that includes our families. As hard as it is, that's what that includes. That's the kind of man Abraham was. And it's like, well, that's an unfair ask, right? That's just too hard, too tough. This is what Christ asks of us followers when he tells them that they must take up their cross. Let me ask you a question. Who did Jesus Christ live his life for? Probably the one answer you cannot give is himself. He lived for the Father. And he says this in Matthew chapter 16, verses 24 through 27. Then Jesus told his disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life would lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man? Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man? What will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? What will it profit a man if he sacrifices his soul and gets everything else? Nothing. Or what shall a man give in return for his soul? For the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay each person according to what he has done. So when you think about that instance, to what he has done as we do things, we're constantly in that, and I'll call it this, and I don't know if this is a technical term, but we'll call it this, and I expect it to be understood. Everything we do is within that sacrifice matrix. In that sacrifice matrix. Everything. Why do you go to work? Why do you work your job? Oh, because I love it. No. So that my family's provided for. So what I'm saying there is that my time is worth. I don't work for Cadestro. I don't work for money. I don't work for any of that. If anything, I work for my family. And on top of that, I also work for this image, because if you're a Christian, right, you also work in a way that Christ lived his life. So when you work like you would think Christ would work. To sacrifice God. And think about this thing. This is the way that it works if you flip it over. Say if Cain, and this will sound comical and it's kind of intentional, but it's also very, brought the fruits of the ground to God. Right? And it wasn't good to God. It wasn't acceptable to God. So it's like maybe Cain, I don't know, maybe he had a really nice looking ear of corn that he's like, man, that's the greatest ear of corn I've ever seen in my life. And I am not going to give that to God. So I'm going to keep it, I'm going to take this stuff to God instead, and I'm going to keep that piece of corn for myself. And what he just did right there, when he did that, was saying, I sacrifice God to this ear of corn. Because the roles were flipped. Because if I say, I will not give this to you, we're flipped. Because if I say, I will not give this to you, then I will give my relationship with you to this. Or that I'm supposed to have with you to this instead. You know, we talked about this, and me and Adam, I think. You know, we talked about this, and me and Adam, I think we talked about this a good long while after services one night, whenever he was having his gospel meeting. And we talked about this. It's like, because he brought up this point. He said, you know, we get really excited, and we get really, really excited to watch grown men chase a ball around the field. Micah and I just were talking yesterday about our shared interest. By the way, Tony, I don't know if you know he's a Braves fan. I see you nodding your head. You're saying good? Attaboy. See there? Oh! I'm telling you, it's going to get me. For unrelated reasons than the last one. But anyhow, when you think about this, but these schedules kind of conflict sometimes. So it's like, if I decide that I'm going to go and I'm going to watch grown men chase a ball around the field, there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But if I say in my head that I will do this, but I will not sacrifice time to God, what have you just done? Baseball, God. So in the grand scheme of things, what you're saying is, I'll sacrifice my relationship with God to baseball. It's all about trying to keep these things in order. Okay, now, that's too hard. Right? That's tough. Yes, it's tough. It's not like you want it to be easy, right? Because it's like, man, it's like, yes, let's just all worship the guy who lived the easiest life. You think about how hard this is. Like, number one, when you do something that is your fault and people come to bear down on you for what you did was your fault, it's very rare that a person goes, I take full responsibility for my actions. Think about Adam in the Garden of Eden, right? It's like, Adam, why did you eat from this tree? And he's like, the woman eat from this tree. And he's like, the woman? Right? And then the woman, it's like, Eve, why did you take from this tree? And she's like, the serpent. It's never, I did it. Now think about this when the other side. How often would you take responsibility? I did it. Now think about this when the other side. How often would you take responsibility for someone else's wrongdoing that was of no fault of your own? And the life that Christ lived was literally taking on the responsibility of everyone else's wrongdoing. He himself did nothing wrong. But he was willing to do it. You know, you think about it, the way that the country kind of goes nowadays. It's like we're lying, and you can see it. You know, Tony talked about his prayer. It's like people are moving away. It's like you can see it. We talked about it Sunday morning when we talked about the prodigal son. Son's falling apart. But it's like when the one son decides to come back, what's the other son going to be waiting to do? Is he going to be like, you never killed a fatted calf for me? Or are we like the Father? You know, it says, you must be perfect as your heavenly Father. In that prodigal son, in the parable of the prodigal son, what we're aiming at, we're not aiming at being either son. We're aiming at being like the Father. All these things in mind, consider this. It's too hard. I can't do that. You know, you might even say, well, no one's ever done that for me. You might even say, well, no one's ever done that for me. Well, that's where we're going, right? John chapter 3, verses 16 through 17. For God so loved the world. Who's the world? That's all of us. That's the ones that took the creation. If you go through creation, it's like, God created that and it was good. God created this and it was good. And then He created man, and man had free will, and man decided, hey, we'll be bad. Right? God so loved the world that He gave, or you can say He sacrificed His only Son, that whoever believes in Him should not perish but have eternal life. For God did not send His Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through Him. Now, reapply the sacrifice structure. Think about the three components of the sacrifice. And think about what this means for you as valued by God, right? The offerer, the offering, and the offered to, right? 1, 2, and 3. We stated that the importance of the offered to the offerer is directly related. So Tony would feel mighty important if I would say, hey, I'm giving up my house for your happiness. You'd feel pretty important to me, right? Now it's like, okay, what about a weed eater? And I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. You would feel pretty low, right? Same thing. Same thing. The importance of the offered to the offerer is directly related to the importance of the offering. What happens when we apply this framework to Christ's sacrifice? Who is the offerer? God. The role's reversed. The offering isn't made by man this time. The offering is made by God. It's not Cain offering to God, it's God offering to. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. What is the offering? His Son. You know, when we were going through all that torment right there, envisioning what it would be like for us to sacrifice our own son, Abraham sacrificing Isaac, right? How hard that would be. Oh, that's not fair. That's too hard. That's too tough. Well, what did God sacrifice? What did God offer for you? It was an easy offering. It's not like, you got to think. What Isaac was going to go through, he was going to be tied up and he was going to have a knife stuck in him and then he would die. He wasn't going to hang on a cross for hours upon hours upon hours on end. That was the offering. The whole time, having within his ability to say, enough's enough, you'll get what you deserve instead of my mercy. Who is he offering to? Us. Us. You want to know how important you are to God? We went through Abraham. And you think about, man, what a mind-blowing sacrifice that would have to be. What a mind-blowing faith in God. Of so great a value. You think God's kind of offering a little bit, hey, there's going to be enough of my creation that will say that they will live in the footsteps of my son if I sacrifice him to them. And if any one of you do it and find your way back to me, then that's worth it. I'm coming back to this because it's very similar to what we're talking about. When Tony mentions in his prayer, it's like, we know we're going away from you. What are we sacrificing to? Do I sacrifice my time to social media? Do I sacrifice my time to sports? And you think about all the things you can. And here's the thing, all these things can be used for good. But what I'm saying is, it's like, what am I saying? Do I make any time? It's like, maybe the sum totality of the entire world's distractions is enough to get me to sacrifice what little time I would eke out for God and studying God's Word and trying to come to a better understanding of what God is to me. Maybe that's some totality. Maybe whenever we look at this, maybe that's the devil's greatest trick, right? To say it's so good and there's so much else out in the world that you can sacrifice your time. What have we done with this meaningful declaration of God's love for us? Do we turn a blind eye to it? Do we turn a deaf ear to it? Because here's the thing, the very true fact, the true fact, that's a little bit redundant, right? But the very fact that we're witnessing in our culture right now is that we're turning a deaf ear to it. We're turning a blind eye to it. More so than we have in years and years past. That's a little... Not for my sake. I worry for their sake. So I ask you, who is the God, and here it's a very real question, who is the God that you sacrifice to? Is it the one true God? The God of the Bible. And if you believe that, do you believe that He gave His only begotten Son for you? And if you believe that, then what sacrifices have you made to make sure that you know, and that God knows, and that everyone else knows, that this is the God that I serve, and this is His Son that I serve, and this is His Son that I serve. The way that you do that is you offer yourself back to Him, and you cleanse yourself to be part of His body. If there's any here that would wish to do that tonight, we ask you that you do so. And maybe we went on the way, and maybe we got away from that. And that's the beauty of it. Thanks for pointing this out. How many times did the Father sit on that hill before the prodigal son was actually on the road coming back to Him? The Father is always sitting on the hill. And He's waiting to embrace you if you want to come back to the way. If any of these things apply to you and you want to take care of them in a public manner, and ask for what we can do for you, we ask you to do this now as we stand and as we sing this invitation song.